I had the incredible privilege of growing up with a father who was probably one of the more technical men I've ever met. I remember as a child watching him soldering and building circuitry. He was an RF engineer at Nortel. And so it was quite an idyllic childhood. I learned very quickly that you could solve incredible problems. And I guess best way to describe it is I had an idyllic childhood. I grew up with 5 square miles of NCC greenbelt out the backyard and a river across the street. So if that's the case and you like to do things, you build things like electric bicycles. And this is, you got to realize there's no such thing. I would be 11 at that time, and that would be 45 years ago. So the whole story of Muraudio really started all the way back there, because for me, how would I describe this in simple terms? But there was always a bent towards how things worked. I mean, that's the best way I would describe it. I enjoyed just solving challenges, and but let's give a few pivotal points, I guess. Like I remember specific milestones, like when I was about 10, I asked my parents, for Christmas, I wanted a loudspeaker that I'd seen, because Radio Shack was one of my favorite stores. It had just incredible things. I mean, even 40, 50 years ago, it was still something. And so I'd asked for an 8-inch driver with a whizzer cone, because I wanted to build. And I put together a beautiful set of solid redwood cabinet speakers. They were at the time powered by an 8-track player. We didn't have the same kind of source equipment that you have now. There's no way. So it was an adventure in itself, and I had to get into the design of electronics to do a power supply, all these things. And in the background, I had a gentle father who never told me how to do things. His motto was just answer questions. So along the way, I developed the ability to effectively design. And there were so many things when I look back that all flowed into this. I mean, as a young kid, I even built a speedboat. I was about 17 when I did this. It was built from scratch. I realize some of the background isn't entirely audio, but I'm just giving you a sense of character and capability. I think that would be important for you to understand what we've accomplished here. But anyway, in regards to speedboat, I literally copied a larger speedboat, scaled it down, built it in the garage, put a 55 horsepower motor on it, and it was a whole lot of fun. But my boating career ended very abruptly when I literally went airborne. And I didn't hurt myself, but anyway, I decided that I would pass on that. And by the time I was in high school, though, I was probably building things that you wouldn't normally see. I built there was no such thing as a ghetto blaster 45 years ago, the idea of a portable music box. So I literally took a couple of, I was also into car audio and many other things. I was tricking out my first car. And I literally created a beautiful cabinet. I went on to make about 5 of them altogether, but it basically had 2 really nice 6x9s, a high-powered car amp, and motorcycle battery, built-in charger, electronics. And I could take this and go sit it down in the foyer area at my high school. And the fact we were appeasing the natives, because he gave us permission to do this anytime. And I actually got to know the principal. He became quite a good ally. At one point, I approached him with a few other friends and said, hey, can we do this on a formal basis? Bring equipment and set up what later became called Foyer Fest. In grade 11, 12, I was into amplifier design. My father was coaching me again, but by then I had a pretty strong knowledge of analog circuitry. And I built a 1200 watt RMS amplifier with 100 kilohertz power bandwidth, 100 dB signal to noise ratio. And this is back, what would that be? I was 17, so that's almost 40 years ago. That amp still exists today. I actually tracked down the owner recently, and he's going to let me borrow it to try it out. But point is, it was a huge amplifier, and to go with that, I had massive speakers. And one year we did I brought my equipment and did the school dance, and it was amazing. It was more than powerful enough for an entire gymnasium. It sounded absolutely wonderful. I was in heaven. And the interesting thing about all that is I remember very clearly my last days of high school. I was called to the principal's office, and I thought, uh-oh, I must be in trouble. But this was in grade 13 for me, which would be 83. And I wasn't in trouble at all. The principal actually said to me, he said, Murray, I've watched what you've done over the years. We've got about $5,000 in a budget. We'd like to do a sound system for our cafeteria. Did you do that? What kid in grade 13 just gets a $5,000 budget from a principal? Well, it's a principal who'd watched the kinds of things that had been done, the quality level. And so, yeah, I had a great summer, installed an amazing system, some gorgeous Yamaha gear, welded up and painted a beautiful multi-100-pound safe that literally got bolted down. Took 3 people to get at the equipment. Yeah, 2 to lift it and 1 to get at the locks. Anyway, so that was a specific memory of just things that are important in terms of the milestone. And of course, you would expect a guy like me who loves to build and design would become an engineer, and I did. I worked throughout my studies part-time. I worked at a number of different firms. One of them was basically I did analog circuit design for various things, or for various projects. And I graduated in '87 as an electrical engineer and immediately started working in the field. I was working on video circuitry, analog amplifier design, switching power supplies. And it works, throughout this whole time period, I was basically just continuing to learn. And I'll never forget one of the most pivotal moments that I would say changed my trajectory, because in '89, I saw an article in a magazine, and it was entitled "Build Your Own ESL." Now, for some of you, '89 doesn't seem that long ago, maybe, but in my history, that's quite a few years. And so I did. I built an amazing, like a 2-foot square flat panel ESL. And what I noticed immediately was how directional it was. So see, this was a benchmark, a point in my memory, just how incredibly directional a flat planar transducer is. Because one of the things that I could do is I took this outdoors, and I could literally point it across a soccer pitch, because at the time I was living over in the South Keys area. And there's a very large field behind the Greenboro Community Center. Not that that matters where, but point is, it was a couple 100 yards. And I could point this at people walking down the paths. They would stop, start looking around to see where the music was coming from, where the sound was coming from. Well, I'd call that directional. So just park that thought. Highly directional flat panel speakers, okay? And from that, a little bit later on, I'd been continuing in my career, and in 2001, I saw an article that basically was for Martin Logan. Like, I'll pay homage, okay, because there are a few key brands that have factored into this entire story. Martin Logan is certainly one of them. I went down to the audio shop in Ottawa and with a friend, and heard some of the panel speakers that Martin Logan produced. I absolutely loved them. But my response wasn't to save money. My response was to build. I actually built 3 pairs of beautiful solid ash cabinet, 6-foot curved panel ESLs. And I'm not saying that I would compare them specifically with Martin Logan's, but I love the sound of a planar or a line source type driver. And so I built these speakers. And at this point, you have to appreciate in my career, I had experience from other work with high voltage power supplies. I did work for a company, JDS Uniphase. You probably heard that name. Designed various like fiber optic type products for them, high precision stuff. And then later in my career, I worked as an analog circuit designer. I did high voltage power supplies as well. So I had all the tools I needed to make ESL come true. But another pivotal point was a friend of mine in 2004. He called me up and he said, "Hey, I just bought some MBL 101s." And I heard those and I was immediately wrecked. I loved the way they sounded, the sound presentation, just the way you could move about and enjoy this. But really, what I was familiar with and what I loved a little bit more, I guess would be a way of putting it, was just the clarity of the ESL. It's just the idea of a very lightweight planar driver. And so I asked myself a very, well, in hindsight, perhaps a bold and maybe foolish question. How hard could it be to build an omnidirectional ESL? Well, I got to admit, if I'd known the answer to that question right then, I might not have these speakers here. Because in all, it took an incredible amount of time. Now, there's a bit of backstory here I want to present too. You're probably wondering, how did this come about? Well, I actually founded a company in 1996 called Luminos, which was to further some of my ideas in fiber optics. Luminos is going strong today. We sell optical switches, and I say we because I'm actually running two portfolios. I look after two different ventures. Muraudio has a team. Luminos has a team. These both run in parallel at one facility, and it works fantastic. And the reason I say it works fantastic is picture a guy who's wanting to build things. How do you do that? Because if you understood the machinery behind this development, you appreciate that it's a massive engineering undertaking. So by 96, I'm founding a company. And by 99, 2000, I've got staff. I've got a machine shop, full machine shop. I've got an engineering team. So what better thing to do than to start building and designing and looking at issues and challenges? Because that burning question, how do you make an omnidirectional ESL? It's a huge question, huge question. So in 2005, I actually set out to build a small scale version of what I will call a continuous curve ESL. What I mean by that is an ESL that's not only curved this way, which is familiar for anyone who has a Martin Logan type speaker. There's also curvature in a second direction, and I'll mention specifically why that's important. Okay, in the proof of concept speaker, which was done in 2005, it was basically a bookshelf speaker, and it had a piece of, well, imagine a 2-foot diameter ball, and I kept 45 degrees each way. So it was about an 8.5 inch, effectively tweeter. And it imaged beautifully to a point. I still have them. But it was an ESL that all of a sudden, I could hear precise location of sound. I could hear precise, or a precise, how would you say, just depth of field. Well, it got me thinking, what exactly is the key to doing a speaker that effectively images to a point? Now, the reason I say that is, again, I'll back up to the idea of the MBLs as a traditional, they are a traditional dynamic speaker in a sense. They do have a tweeter, a mid-range, a lower mid-range, and a woofer. But the sound that you hear is tied to the small 1-inch tweeter, because the highest frequencies, of course, are the most directional. So I'd say one of the biggest pivotal moments to this whole discussion of why this exists and is just the desire to experiment and to figure things out. So without having the props here, because it's very awkward, I want to just describe briefly, probably the eureka moment, if I can use that term, okay? Imagine taking two full-size doors and setting them up at about a 15-degree opening. Now, they're big, and at the back of the opening, for maybe 3-4 inches, there's just a bit of fiberglass stuff. Well, here's where the experiment got interesting. I have the original piece. This is a single cell electrostatic transducer. And I didn't, unfortunately, because it's been so long and we've moved, I didn't actually keep the whole family, because there's a straight one and there's various curvatures as well. But what happened one day, and I probably was running around like a crazy person, would be my description of the event. I put a simple straight ESL inside the doors that I described, and the doors are so big you can put your head in it. And sure enough, I heard the music. Now the piece I was listening to, and I remember very clearly, was Holly Cole. I can see clearly now. And her voice sounded beautifully silky smooth like electrostats do, even with the simple line transducer, because the doors formed a boundary that you could actually hear the sound because the idea there is I wanted to simulate a piece, a section of an omnidirectional transducer. So I built basically a 15-degree wedge. And with a straight ESL transducer, and you put your head in, you had a perception of sound being there, but it was hard to tell and judge where the sound was depth-wise. So then I switched to the curved transducer, because you can see this guy here, it has a radius of about 2 meters. And what happened was just, it blew me out of the water. I can't describe it any other way. All of a sudden, just like that, I knew exactly where Holly Cole was singing from. She was presented right in front of me. It was so tangible. And all of a sudden I realized, okay, that's the key. For a loudspeaker to image to a point, you need curvature in more than one plane. Now, that resulted in a whole host of specific experiments. I mean, one of the nice things in our new facility is we actually have our own anechoic chamber. So that was absolutely instrumental in the early, in perfecting the sound characteristics and the different aspects of integrating an electrostat, of course, with other drivers. Now, the thing about this is I want to present to you an idea, gentlemen, of just a concept. I refer to this as imaging frequencies. Now, what do I mean by that? Okay, if you were listening to
something like that.
Pardon? Okay. If you're listening to any sound system that is presenting you with a sound field, an image, you may not realize it, but most of the perception that you have for placement is actually coming from the frequencies above about 2 kilohertz. And it's an easy test. Just put a digital filter and cut off above 2 kilohertz. And what you'll find is that if you move about, you can't really tell where anything is anymore. It's actually the higher frequencies that create the image. And so what we found in the process of designing and developing this technology is that if you look at 2 kilohertz, well, that's a wavelength about this big. Half of that, lambda by 2, is about this big. And that's actually what sets this dimension. What you'll find, and what I could show you if you could see it in a chamber, is that at the higher frequencies where imaging occurs, you're actually only hearing the one segment that you're looking at. I know that sounds a little bit unusual, but it is just the physics. You hear the section you're looking at. What that means is that no matter where you are in front of this particular type of driver, you actually perceive a focal point very, very cleanly, just like I described with the single cell transducer, but it's behind the speaker a couple meters. And so what happens with this particular ESL is that it will present a sound field away from itself. Now, why is that important? It actually changes the characteristics a little bit of how you perceive. Because when you're listening to music, you may not realize it all the time. You generally, how do I describe this? Stereo is technically an illusion. Your mind creates the sound field from phase information that's presented in the audio. But whether you realize it or not, every time there's a cue, I'll call it a mono cue, like a little bop or something from an instrument, you all of a sudden know where the speaker is. And if you want to understand that further, try listening to one speaker and you'll see what I mean. If you move about and you're listening to only one speaker, your perception is absolutely anchored to the tweeter because the sound is most directional at high frequencies. And so in this case, what we've done is we've come up with a whole new technology. There is no other electrostat in the world that uses compound curvature in this way to generate a precise focal point. Now, I've always loved the sound of a line source because that's basically what I was used to. But the day that I heard effectively an ESL capable of doing a point source type image, it just changed things for me. I should probably mention as well, let's see, just if you look at the way it operates, again, I'll come back to the prop. You have, of course, curvature in one direction. I tried to explain the idea that when you listen to these speakers at the higher frequencies where imaging happens, you are hearing one particular point because of the curvature of the structure. Now, This has been quite an incredible adventure, and I should mention too, as well, that this technology, the idea of a compound curved electrostat, it's patented. And in my career as an engineer over the last 38 years, I've written 19 applications altogether, various things. A good number of them are, of course, relating to this technology. Some of them are relating to fiber optics and other fields. I've got quite a broad background in terms of patenting. But this particular patent was special to me. It's the only one that I would say I would call clean and clear. Now, what I mean by that is in patent language, when you go after the claims, you're trying to get the highest claim. In this case, the one we wanted was curvature in two directions. In other words, the unique essence of what this design brings. And I remember the examiner rejecting the highest claim. So I called him and I said, why did you reject? He says, well, I found a picture of an electrostat that shows compound curvature. And I knew the picture because I was involved in the process. I said, but sir, that looks like a paper origami beehive. Like, I'm not kidding. It was incredible. This picture was a hand-drawn sketch. It looked like it was about the size of maybe a basketball. And it was clearly made out of paper with embedded wires and all this. And I just said to the examiner, I said, it says it's made of paper. If you actually built an electrostat out of paper, it would burst into flames. If you ever had, an issue with sparking, he says, oh, you're not going to make yours out of paper? I said, no. He says, oh, well, all you have to do then is the last sentence of this application, just write, and not made of paper. Okay, we did that. And it was filed clean and clear, all claims. And so that, to me, that's incredible, because every time you go through the patenting process, it reminds you it's a big world. It's very, very rare that you actually go through the whole process and not have to narrow down the claims to something much, much less. And in my entire career of 19 applications, this is the only application that was clean and clear. And so that basically was a good benchmark for us, that nobody else was thinking along these lines. And if you read one of the reviews from Robert E. Green, I mean, I'll be honest, I still am humbled if I read it, because he actually compared this effort to what he referred to as some of the greats of industry. Now, I don't pretend to have the background or gravitas that any of the gentlemen he named has. But what we do have is a technology that is unique. It is a compound curve DSL, and the best way to understand it, of course, is to hear it. And so we're working as a company to bring that message forward. And we've already been to over a dozen shows. These speakers, the concept itself has won over 20 awards. It's been so well received, we're absolutely amazed. Let's see, what else? Yeah, I mentioned, of course, my background, including Luminos, and I did want to mention that too, because as you can appreciate, developing all of the machinery and process equipment and everything else to do this is expensive. So this was done to get to the point of proof of concept for the first Omni. It was about 10,000 hours of effort done in parallel over a period of over a decade. And there's so many problems to solve. One of the smaller ones you wouldn't think is a big one is, for instance, a piece like this. It's just made of perforated metal. It has sharp corners. Try and coat that with anything, and the sharp corners actually attract the electrostatic field, and you can't operate at a high voltage, so you don't get a good sound pressure level. Well, all of these units here use technology that Muraudio has developed. We have machinery, specialized machinery from the ground up that was developed to remove the sharp corners from perforated metal. Well, there are many ways to build an electrostat. I mean, there are other technologies that use printed circuit board materials, wires, various things, but we needed a structure that was formable, because of the original epiphany that you had to have curvature in two directions, you also need to be able to form in two directions. And we decided early on we weren't going to try to build an Omni with dozens of these in a frame. It would be very awkward, very expensive, and difficult to bring to market. So we set out to effectively create a larger panel structure that has many cells. And, I should mention a few things about Luminos itself and Muraudio as well. There is, of course, a team that is involved in this work. It's significant. The Muraudio team consists of a business director named Robert Nelson, great guy. I've known him over 40 years. And he got involved because he asked me one day casually about 2006, hey, whatever happened to the speakers? And I said, oh, I built some. And he actually heard some of the 6-foot Martin Logan style line source speakers I built, and he immediately purchased a pair. So we started discussions, and he had just sold his company. He's an engineer also, electrical engineer, which is fantastic because it means that he understands at a high level what has to happen to make all this happen. And it's been a really good fit. We also have a gentleman I've known over 35 years. He's a physicist. He's fantastic at problem solving. He's our production manager. So our production manager is someone who understands process details, which is absolutely important. And then there's myself. I'm principal lead designer. My role in the company is CTO founder. And it's been an honor to get to this point. So basically the history of the development, we perfected the technology to create the transducers. Our first product that was brought to market, we launched in 2013, this speaker. In its first form, it was actually a powered speaker. It had built-in amplification. There are some advantages to that. You can, of course, use DSP technology. Now, whether you think that that's the best idea or not, that's of course, still remains to be seen. But we had a phenomenal first rollout with that. It was actually at the SSI show in Montreal, and we were blessed right away with partners who wanted to showcase their equipment using our speakers. That was wonderful. And shortly after that, we released a passive version of the speaker, which we referred to as the PX1. In fact, that's what's here. One of the most incredible things about the matching of this particular speaker is, if you think about it, there's 3 panels here which go all the way around. It is an omni cell. And there are 3 drivers which go all the way around. So in terms of matching the dispersion characteristics, it was fantastic. We basically had an omni woofer cell and an omni ESL. So there's no real change. You can walk right, we could technically have the speaker spinning while you're listening to it. And that just creates an incredible opportunity. The challenge we face with these guys is that being an omni, you're sensitive to side energy coming off the walls. And so whenever we've demonstrated these in a larger room, it's been magnificent. You can almost pass Kleenex. Just the sound presentation is incredible. We've on many occasions, I don't know if you could call it an award specifically, but we've won best piano. I mean, how would you describe that? It's a hard instrument to reproduce. But the ability for this type of speaker to produce live sound fields is something you have to just experience. And so from here, of course, being a company that introduced something at a fairly high price point, we immediately turned our focus towards a more cost affordable system. This is actually the exact same technology. It has the same sound characteristic in every detail. It's a single panel instead of the 3, and it covers 120 degrees. Now, one of the unique attributes of this speaker is that being a 120 degree operating angle, what it means is that it can actually produce uniform tonality for more than 90 degrees, okay? So what that gives you is effectively the ability. Now, here's a tough one for you, because in my understanding of imaging, one of my tests, if I go into a room, because of what we do, is I will sit on purpose in front of one of the speakers to see what I hear. And almost invariably, when I do that, the sound field is utterly collapsed into itself. And so effectively what you have is you're hearing the one speaker. Now, why do I care about this? It's because the emphasis of this technology is to be able to live your life and enjoy music in your home and share. Like, I think there is a common understanding that there's a sweet spot, and that makes sense. Many technologies present the best in one place. But this is a technology where you can comfortably sit in front of one of the speakers and your soundstage has not collapsed. You could, in fact, what I would suggest is they're probably the nicest speaker you'll ever hear for home theater. I have a set myself with a large screen TV, just a pair. And I don't actually, I often turn off the Dolby. It's just the center channel mixed into the mains, fantastic. The sound, as I mentioned before, the sound field is presented behind the speaker. So you actually have the voicing and all of the music information right in the picture. It's incredible. And we will, of course, at some point in the near future, be demonstrating a video type capability at one of our shows. So anyway, the reason, I just wanted to highlight this model here. This is the SP1, as we call it, which stands for single panel. And it looks a little bit busy in a sense, but there is a very strategic reason for this presentation. The woofers are comparable in width to the panel. And what this means is that this speaker has uniform dispersion at its crossover. And that's absolutely key, because when you set up a system like this, you want to have perfect tonal balance as you move off axis, because that's one of the things that actually allows you to have a wide soundstage, because you can listen from various perspectives, various positions. So there's a lot of engineering has gone into this. There's certain aspects of the cabinetry which you can't really see, but these actually contain inertial damping cells to remove the reactionary energy from the woofers, so that the speaker is not shaking, if you will, because when woofers move, they push. They always do. And so we've removed that energy. And so this speaker, for instance, is very friendly to use in a condo. It's not transmitting significant energy to the floor. And anyway, it's a quite an experience, and I hope you will have the opportunity at some time to hear them for yourselves. Let's see.
Did you want to take some questions, Murray, or have?
Well, I'm just.
Or,
the reality is, there's just so many directions I could go. So I'm just trying to make sure I make the best use of time. I appreciate that everyone has taken some time today to be here. This is certainly an honor. But what I should mention too is that in the case of this speaker itself, it was 4 years in the design. We didn't just go right from here to here and then just sell it. It took 4 years to get it to the point where we were absolutely satisfied that it had all the salient quality points of a Muraudio speaker. And so we'll certainly, yeah, actually, maybe that's the best way to look at this. I'd love to answer some questions, because maybe that's a good way to bring out some of the other aspects from the listener perspective. So let's do that. Let's open it up.
Gary and then Jonathan.
Okay.
Hey, hi, Murray. Thank you for the presentation. You're talking about 120 degrees, and you described them as omni. I'm just as interested in the backside of the speakers. Are they omnis, or what is the radiation pattern?
Okay, the panel itself, this is one panel, okay? And when I say one panel, it covers 120 degrees, and that's in the horizontal direction. And in terms of the radiation pattern, there's also curvature in the other direction, which covers about 16 degrees in terms of an arc. You can see that in the side shape. Now, that was very deliberately chosen so that this 2-foot height projects to a 4-foot height when you're about 2 meters back. Most people tend to listen to speakers to maybe 3 meters back. So what this means is that because the sound is diverging very gently, you're not getting a bounce off the floor or the ceiling. And now you can stand up and lie down on your sofa. So sorry.
Is there a similar panel on the back side or not?
No, you can see the back of the speaker here. It's you've got one panel here for this case, and you see right through it in the back. It's curved the opposite way.
So it's like the Martin Logan or sound design, where basically just a single panel that's kind of dipolar in essence.
Yes, this is what you could characterize. You could characterize a speaker as a wide dispersion dipole.
Is it open back then?
Yes, this model is open back. The omnidirectional is not. It has 3 panels that go all the way around, and there's a cell inside that absorbs the rear energy of the panel.
Okay, that was going to be another question. It must be really tough to build a omnidirectional planar speaker, because the sound that is going forward would also be going backward.
Yes,
You don't want an out of phase
exactly.
problem happening all around. But the big ones are pure omnis then.
Yes. In fact, it's interesting you raise that point, because there is an acoustic absorber inside. And if I take that absorber out, which of course we started without one, when we did the frequency sweep on it, you would have been shocked. There was a 20, no, there was a 29 dB notch at 90
Yeah.
degrees. Like it just couldn't produce sound because it was collapsing on itself. And we have a lot of experience with advanced acoustic materials. So we actually adapted some of the materials that we work with for other applications. And when that absorber cell was installed, that 29 dB notch became a half dB notch.
I imagine MBL had the same problem in trying to design. They have a pure omni.
They would have the same challenge. In fact, if you ever see how it's made, because the MBL speakers are actually on the Discovery channels, how it's made, and you can see them stuffing the little cavities full of various absorbent materials.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Jonathan, I think you had a question.
Following right along on this topic of dispersion, did you ever consider making the SP1 a pure monopole, since you do have that absorption technology and all of that, and reduce the sort of room acoustics interaction challenges of any dipole?
Oh man, you just crawled into my head, because, and I'll explain what I mean by that. We love this speaker. We love how it sounds. The Omni is unbeatable. In fact, we have cases where if somebody comes to buy this and hears this, they get wrecked, because the Omni sound field is just, it's indescribable. The challenge is that sound is coming from every direction. So they work fantastic in a big room. We do have, and so in other words, what we would love to have is an Omni, just like this, except remove the side energy that you don't need, that you can't hear, except for when it bounces off of a wall. And that is actually a potential or a model that we're working, that's in development at the moment. It would potentially be, I guess the way you would describe it is, it would be the same front and back. In other words, you have full symmetry from the front and back perspective, so that the rear wave is an exact duplicate of the front speaker. Because that's one of the signature characteristics of an Omni, is that every reflection, even if you don't want it, is actually a true copy, if you will, of the loudspeaker. And that's one of the reasons why you have challenges with dynamic speakers in placement, is that you need to eliminate the side copies, because the tweeters only radiate frontwards. And so you end up with a very boomy sounding side copy, if I can call it that. And so you do end up having to do a lot of treatment. This particular speaker is a dream. We can demonstrate it in small hotel rooms with absolute fearlessness. I mean, we generally demonstrate this, and you take a typical hotel room that's 12, 13 feet wide. You can, or if you wish, put acoustic treatments on the side, but you don't even need it. And that, I think that says a lot right there. Because there's no energy coming out the side, you don't have to deal with the reflection or bounce off the walls. And that makes it easier to place.
And what about the rear? Because they generate 100% same amount of energy towards the rear, and of course that bounces off the wall behind them, off the side walls, and location and management of that rear wave is always a big challenge with any type of dipole speaker. I was wondering, from a design perspective, if you ever considered doing a monopole version of an SP1.
Yes, in fact, we have one that's being considered right now in development. It would technically be a monopole, okay? Because right now, if you look at a dipole, of course, you have the phase information is like this. But on this speaker here, which is an Omni, it's always like this. Well, what we're describing is effectively a monopole reduced omni, if I can call it that. In other words, you're deliberately not generating the side energy, but you could take 120 at the front and back, and they are also moving directly in phase with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what one of the areas that we're looking at, because it can take this type of sound field and bring it into a smaller room.
Mhm.
Now,
Thanks.
now that particular model that we're looking at will be priced more or less in between these two, because it's effectively 2/3 of the ESL technology, 2 panels instead of 1, and it will also duplicate. It'll have full symmetry front and back. For the, in other words, all of the imaging, or I should say, the reflections from the wall that are produced will be exact copies of the speaker. And that's one of the characteristics of an Omni when you hear it, is that you're effectively imagining a bigger sound field because you can hear reflections of duplicate speakers. Now, I'm not suggesting that you're messing with the sound staging. There are rules to all of this. You want to make sure that any reflected copies have a very minimal percentage of the perceived energy. Placement's critical. It's always critical.
Murray, I think you should point out, because those were very good questions, in particular in regard to the dipole nature. What I would point out is that you very much factored this dipole issue into the SP1, that they actually work with the wall. So the idea of the SP1 is that it actually works with that technically problem that you have, but it basically uses it.
Yes, that's actually a good point, Roland. These particular speakers aren't actually that difficult to place. I would suggest 2 or 3 feet out from the wall. It's pretty normal for an ESL, and I would suggest placement is actually quite easy.
Bill and then Gary. Bill, you have a question?
Yes, thanks. Last year, I dropped by a store in Toronto, Executive Stereo. That's where I purchased my Martin Logan 15As a couple of years ago. And I noticed that Ed, the owner, said, listen to this. And he has a pair of SP1s in the store, just an in-store special, he calls it, with a beautiful wood finish. So I had to listen to it, and it wasn't set up properly. It wasn't in a listening room, but I was so impressed with it. And I was thinking, if I had heard this, I might have stopped here and said, this is what good enough. This is what I would need, before I heard the Martin Logan years ago. So, and he said it was a Canadian company also.
It's funny that you say that. I mean, I did mention, just in all fairness, that Martin Logan is of course one of my muses. I heard them, and it's part of the story, part of the journey. But you can't know what you haven't heard. And I understand what you're saying, because this, in my experience, it shows. I've experienced what I will call 3 profanity moments. And what I mean by that is someone comes in, sits down, starts listening, and you see their head moving around, and the next thing you hear is basically someone drops a really loud F-bomb right in the middle of the show, and it's so strange and disturbing. And then they'll find you after the show and say, I just bought a such and such. And I have to admit, a couple of times they were referring to panel speakers, particularly the Martin Logans. And I mean, I love the sound characteristic of a line source. I really do. That was part, like I said, it's part of the story. They're one of my muses. But when you hear what becomes a broader sound field, because the thing about the Martin Logan speakers I like is that you can set it up and get a beautiful, expansive sound field. You really can. But it's difficult to share with many people. It really is. Because a 30-degree curvature, if you're honest, I mean, you're not going to sit at the boundary of that curvature. You'll start to hear the sound dropping off. You're going to be using more or less the middle part. And that's why I describe this. It's a 120-degree panel. It's 6 facets, 20 degrees apart, but really it's uniform over about 90. And when I say uniform, I mean you can't tell. If I moved it while you're listening, you wouldn't really notice. That's what I'm referring to as uniform.
Interesting. Gary?
With regard to the previous question about the back wave of the speaker, without getting into a much longer conversation, I would just like to say that it is not desirable to absorb the back wave and collapse all the sound to the speaker grills. That's what causes bad imaging. You want the back wave to cause the depth of imaging and the spaciousness that this type of speaker is capable of.
Yes.
And I'll leave it at that.
No, I would agree with you 100%. Typically in a setup, I would recommend something around 3 feet from the wall, because the goal is for the observer to receive about 3/4 of the energy from the direct front radiation and about 1/4 from the rear. And it gives you the perception of a second set of speakers. That's one way I would describe it. You definitely do not absorb the back wave. In fact, if you set these up with heavy drapes on the wall or acoustic materials behind them, you'll have a bit of a challenge, because they are specifically equalized and all the crossovers are set up on the assumption that people have walls. In other words, we use the rear energy as part of the overall frequency response. You'll have a bit of a dip in the mid-range sections, particularly if you absorb the back wave. And
It's not just a frequency thing, it's a spatial effect that you're creating when you have the back wave helping the sound field, the sound stage become deeper and wider.
yes, I would exactly agree with that.
Murray, I'm curious, at what point do you cross the panels over to the woofers on each of those models?
Okay, well, the omnidirectional PX1, PX2 speakers, the crossover here is dictated by the fact in a sealed cell. Basically, it's when the membrane can't move further and further as you go for deeper notes. So this crossover is set at 450 hertz based on the fact the cell itself can go down to about 300, because you want to have some margin. So this system crosses out at 450, the woofers come in. And on this system, though, being a dipole, you have the ability for air to move from front to back. And dipole cancellation sets in at about 500 hertz based on the physical size. We didn't want to make it too big. And so the crossover here is actually at 750. But before you reach or come to a conclusion, which many have, that that's way too high, I should comment about the drivers we used here. These took well over a year to get designed. They're a small aluminum cone driver with a first resonance that is way beyond what we need. In other words, this is a true pistonic driver. It moves absolutely uniformly, goes cleanly up, out the crossover, out 2 octaves before you have any issue whatsoever, breakup. And this is effectively the panel itself has a natural second order roll off acoustically, just based on its size and its characteristics. And there's also another two poles, if you will, of a filter. So it's a 4-pole filter, 2-pole acoustic, 2-pole electrical, and you have the matching filter set for the low pass for the woofers. So they're very, very carefully integrated. In fact, we've had a number of reviewers comment that they couldn't tell with the cover on, with the grill on, that it wasn't cover on.
How low do those models go in the bass, the sub output?
Okay, well, all of the speakers that Muraudio produces are a sealed woofer design. It's not that I have anything specifically against ported. I just personally prefer the sound myself sealed, because you don't have any there's no group delay for the air moving in and out of a port. In general, ultra high performance studio monitors will be sealed designs, just because you do get tighter bass. You can do a beautiful job of a ported design, but these are sealed. And the reason I bring that point up is that this design is intended to produce real music perfectly. The natural roll off or minus 3 dB point on this design is 45 hertz. Now, given that it's sealed, it still has very significant energy down at 30 hertz, and you get a bit of room lift. So they actually produce incredibly good bass, but the motivation here was to produce all live instruments, all stringed instruments. The 45 hertz is based on the unfretted E string of a guitar, bass guitar, as a benchmark. So they will play all music as designed, as intended. And because the drivers are individual drivers, they're incredibly fast and responsive.
Have you had customers that have tried to integrate subs in to get that lowest octave?
You can. In fact, my home system is fairly unique. I do have a sub. It's an unusual one. It's one that's built into the house. It's a transmission line enclosure type sub. Yeah, you can definitely use a sub with them. It's they have a very, very clean roll-off characteristic. It's just second order. So you just, to get a really smooth crossover, you have to set it really low. It's about 30 hertz. You know how all subs have usually a frequency adjustment capability where they cross out. Well, you actually want to set that down at about 30, maximum 40 hertz. And if you do, it's very, very easy to integrate a sub with these. But the honest truth is, your sub won't have much to do unless you are particularly fond of electronica or sub with a lot of deep electronic bass content. Your sub won't even be doing anything.
What's the efficiency of those speakers, the stand mount ones?
This particular model is 86 dB. And this model here, being an Omni, is actually 82. Now, there's a number of reasons why this is such. Now, they both have the same, we'll call it electrical signature. Their impedance curve is the same. We've deliberately designed our electrostats as 8 ohm systems, but they're 8 ohms in the lower frequencies. So if you were to look at the impedance of this model as well as this one, it would be technically 4 ohms at 10 kilohertz, and then it dips to 2 ohms, purely resistive actually, at 20 kilohertz. And then if you were to go above 20 kilohertz, you're climbing again. Now, we chose to use a minimum of 2 ohms on purpose because it actually makes the speaker very easy to drive. I can drive these. I have actually tested them on a Yamaha AV receiver. It's not a particularly mighty amplifier, but no problem. Sounds just fine. Any decent amplifier can drive these. Our other option would have been to do what Martin Logan has done. We looked at it, we tested it. Martin Logan, for instance, their specifications on some of the bigger models in particular say that they go down to 0.7 ohms at 20 kilohertz. Well, you can kind of get away with that because there isn't much actual energy or content at 20 kilohertz. But we decided to stay with a 2 ohm minimum as opposed to 0.7. I mean, you do pay 3 or 4 dB on paper for efficiency. Like this could have been an 89, which everybody would prefer, and this could have been an 85, 86 if we pushed the amplifier that hard. And as an example, I'll give you a comparison. MBL rates their speaker at 82 dB SPL, but that's actually a 4 ohm rating. So it's really a 79 dB speaker as an 8 ohm rating. So we're marginally more efficient here. And so really what it comes down to is, okay, 86 is not a high efficiency speaker, but you give it 100 watts and you're up in the, you're in the 105 range, so these will easily, they need about 100 watts to run, and these need about 300. And that's basically what it comes down to. And the reason the efficiency is low, if you want to think about it, is if I present you with a very slightly curved panel that's very large, you've got a lot of energy coming towards the listener. Now imagine what happens when you take the same acoustic watts, if you will. Okay, now I'm going to try Omni. Now I'm going to spread that out to 120. Uh-oh, my intensity is dropping. Well, I need to generate curvature to image to a focal point. Oh boy, now I'm curving this way and I have a projection, which is gentle, but it's still real. You're still taking about a 2 dB penalty on dispersion this way. So with all of those things working as the actual physics, we had to develop a panel with a very high output. This is why we became very, I would say, ridiculously fixated on figuring out how to stay with this type of perforated material, okay? We actually, like I said earlier, I mentioned that we developed equipment to remove sharp corners from the perforated material. The reason for that, doing that, is that you want actually to have as much metal as you can get with very little coating, because that allows the panel to have a higher output. One of the other techniques you can use to make panels is you can use a perforation material, if you will, with bigger holes and just use a thicker coating. That's actually what's referred to in industry as microperf. I believe that's a trade name that, or or a trademark that's used by Martin Logan. It's a very sound way of going. But what happens is you end up, like if you can imagine cutting through the material, you have a bridge, a section that gets coated. And as that section gets smaller and smaller, the electrostatic energy coming up has to find somewhere to go. And what happens is you have to reduce the operating voltage, or you get corona effects, like which I would describe in an electrostat. Corona is where you've turned up the bias too high, and it's starting to make a very, very, very faint sort of hissing sound. And if you turn the lights out, you'd actually see a little bit of a purple glow, which nobody wants. See, there are limits to electrostats. So what we did is we designed basically a very robust structure. There was a total of 7 machines that went in like through the history of this whole thing. My wife, oh my goodness, she is the most patient woman you'll ever meet. One of the first machines we actually built, or I built, because I mentioned I was doing this in parallel with another, with the Luminos venture, but I actually built a peening tumbler that was 6 feet in diameter. It was in my garage. Oh my goodness. It actually operated at 120 dB. It was horrific. Needless to say, it didn't last very long in my garage because for many reasons. But no, in all honesty, I would say that we've invested something in excess of $500,000 in just the equipment alone to do the perforated material itself. It's pivotal.
I think that gives us a new definition of wife acceptance factor.
Well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah. AJ, you've had your hand up. AJ, for those of you that don't know him, that are not in the club, is a local speaker builder, Soundfield Audio engineer as well. You're muted, AJ.
Sorry, I was muting my own picture instead of down in the corner. I'm pretty sure I heard your speakers at Florida Audio Expo, but it was the smaller ones, so I didn't miss the larger ones. Correct? You only have the smaller ones at the expo.
Yes. Yeah, we tend to show the omnidirectional ones only in the larger venues because they shine considerably more if you have a bit of space.
Okay, I just wasn't sure if I'd missed it in another room because I'm near certain I heard the smaller ones. And
the SP1 was the model that you would have heard at the expo.
Okay, and being electrostats, you do have to plug them in, correct?
Yes, they require a couple of watts of energy. So yeah, you do plug them in. They have a built-in power supply for the high voltage bias. So you heard them at the Florida Expo, you said, right?
Yes, the smaller ones. When I saw them, I thought, yep, I've heard those, and it had to have been at the Florida Expo, but I didn't get a chance to go to all the rooms. I was kind of cherry picking, and I picked out Muraudio because I had heard good things about you all, so I wanted to hear them. But it looks like you only had the smaller ones there, so yes. I still haven't heard the larger ones. So at some point, maybe I'll get to hear.
Okay, well, we'll have to see if we can help you with that.
Gary, you had a question, a follow-up?
Yeah, just I'm also interested in how loud they can go. Can you play them really loud without electrostatic spark or meltdown?
Well, it depends what you call loud. If you're specifically looking to reproduce a Van Halen concert at 120 dB, no, these speakers don't play that loud. But they actually, because they have what I'd call a coherent sound field. In other words, it actually disperses very gently. They measure almost the same loudness at 1 meter and 2 meters. It's very comparable. So these will easily produce, they'll peak into the 105 dB range on a 100 watt amplifier.
But not 110?
Yeah, you can get up to about 110. That would be their absolute max. We rate them around 105. But myself, I don't know about most people, but I tend to listen sort of in the 90 range. I've discovered from my experience that my own auditory senses compress at around 100. And what I mean by that is if it's loud, it can sound a little bit distorted in your perception. But then if I go further away, it's not the speakers at all. It's my hearing. So myself, I tend to listen around the 90, 95 range as a reasonable max, but they will play considerably higher because I know rock and roll, you got to get in there, you got to get it done. So you do need some power to reproduce a lot of the more kick drum intense type rock and roll type music. So they'll play all genres, I would suggest. But if you are specifically looking to reproduce a Van Halen concert, they'll sound far better than the concert you originally heard, but they won't play as loud.
I record, and I recorded a high school jazz band, and I thought I would be a smart guy and see how loud they were. So I pulled out my phone and measured it at 110 dB where I was recording from. And I was able to play them back at home at that same level. And I was really proud of myself. And it sounded really live.
Oh, no, you do need some, definitely.
I've got a question. This is for people like myself that have electrostatic speakers. Do you think that the speaker cables are more important and have more of an impact for electrostatic speakers than others?
I would have to say yes, because they are, of course, the direct connection to the amplifier. In the case of either of these models, we dip down to 2 ohms. So you would definitely want a very well-constructed, large gauge cable. Doesn't have to be too excessive. But imagine the case of, like, particularly with a Martin Logan type speaker that dips to 0.7. Your cabling becomes that much more critical. You definitely wouldn't want to use a small gauge lamp cord, because you'd introduce enough resistance that it could affect the tightness of the bass, for instance. And so I would suggest we use these with many different cables. We have some what I call entry level types. And as long as it's a decent gauge, you're fine.
Thank you. More questions, folks?
Yeah, quick question here.
Okay.
How about the power curve of especially the SP1? You know, it's you know what I mean by that, right? Which is the frequency response at the various different power levels. So something like 70, 80, 100, you pretty much maintain the same balance, obviously from the driver quality, I would hope so.
Well, yes, that's actually a very, very good question, because these drivers, like I mentioned, that they were over a year in development. They're actually if you're familiar with sort of the parameters of drivers themselves, they have an extremely high QM, or mechanical Q. So in other words, they are controlled almost entirely by the amplifier itself. In other words, the movement is controlled by the damping factor and the low impedance of the amplifier. And what that gives you is a speaker actually that can play extremely high quality bass at very low volume levels. Like, you can listen to these. They're probably one of the nicest, I'll call it late evening speaker. You know, everybody else is asleep. A shoe will come flying at you if you play it too loud, whatever. They're really, really nice, even at low volume. And it's one of the neat attributes of taking that design tact, using that type of driver, is that they will play very uniform tonality at different levels, all the way from quiet to very loud.
Okay, thanks.
Is there Bart will be next. Is there a speaker cover that goes with those, that a speaker grill that covers up the drivers?
Certainly, we can Roland will bring one out. Yes, there is. It's fairly exotic too. It's actually a machine. I can show it to you here. I'll put it on. Yeah, this is the cover. It's quite transparent, as you can see. It's acoustically transparent. It's actually unmeasurable. And it just pops right on. I've never tried doing this sitting down. This could be good. There you go. So it has a very finished look to it. The actual grill itself is also curved, because there's a certain visual flow here where the cabinetry is actually curved. And we just thought it was a very nice accentuation. So yes, these come with the speakers, of course. We just tend to leave them off, because most guys, I think, prefer grills off.
Bart, you had a question or comment?
Yeah, Murray, with both speakers and the placement near the front wall, You were saying 2 to 3 feet. Have you ever experimented with QRD diffractal broadband diffusion?
That's actually a very good question. You can use diffusion to keep the energy and basically spread it out frequency-wise. But what I have found is that it affects the image quality. One of the things about this type of speaker, a dipole, is that you do get a duplicate image of the speaker off the wall. So if you use a diffuse background, you'll actually sort of, I mean, you might like the sound. It's of course always up to the person's perspective, but you'll actually find that the sound stage tends to become a little less deep if you just diffuse the rear wave, as opposed to a pure reflection off a wall, which is more or less the design intent.
I think if you were forced to have the speakers closer to the wall, then it's where the diffusion or absorption would be more beneficial.
Absolutely, you can totally do that. It'll bring down some of the brightness because, like I said, these are optimized specifically for a typical listening environment, somebody who's about 3 meters back. The speakers are placed about 1 meter from the wall. You have to pick parameters to do the optimization. So if you have a smaller space and you need to move them up against a wall, one thing that can be done is just, you can have, as you say, a diffuser will get in there, and because as you bring it closer to the wall, you're actually picking up more of the rear energy. And so you'll find that the brightness comes up just a hint. So if you wanted to fine tune it, you certainly could.
Thank you.
No, you're very welcome.
I think it's interesting within the from the ultra high end audiophile world. Now moving down the line, you've got Jansen Electrostatics, you've got Sanders, Martin Logan. I think there's a couple of King Sound, I think it is. So it's nice that there seems to be the whole price diversification for electrostatic speakers finding their way closer to mainstream consumer pricing. Not quite there, but I think it's interesting that more and more people are being exposed to this type of speaker. Hopefully over time, price points will come down a little bit more as the technology evolves.
No, that's a very fair point. But I would suggest that it's not, you look at a luxury product like this, it's not entirely about price. It's about value, perceived value. Because we've had these speakers compared quite openly to speakers that are 3-4 times the cost in terms of the capability of generating a spacious, detailed, precise sound field. So we would suggest, that for lack of better terms, these are a great value speaker for what they can do.
We haven't said anything about the cost yet, have we? What is the price of these speakers?
This model right now is $16,400. And this one, Roland?
This one is $54,900. Well, actually, just to point out, we were talking a lot about the PX1 on the very right to Murray. That's the original proof of concept. So the PX2 is actually the current production flagship model. So that's the one right beside him. And that one is $54,900 US dollars. That price stays the same, but what will happen with the SP1, as you can see it there now, it's $16,400, but it'll be $19,500 starting June 1st. And you'll see that reflected, for example, in the SAS loudspeaker directory as well. Actually, you made a very good point there with the price points. I'd like to point out that's actually a very good point, because one of the things that really would be great is have more people, more people being able to actually hear the magic of ESLs. Because ESLs themselves, the clarity, the naturalness, it is something truly special. And hopefully, to your point, the more brands actually take it up and bring it down to a lower price level, the whole field of ESLs will benefit. We, unfortunately, the way these are constructed, we're never gonna try to go down to a price point. It's always a performance point, and then we're gonna try to make the best possible value, and that's basically what the SP1 represents, to try to really get down to something that is still expensive, but much more affordable. But we're never gonna compromise on the performance point. That's why we always try to get it as good as we can, but we're never gonna, it's always got to be a true Muraudio where we have exactly that what Murray originally intended to do. But you make a great point. Hopefully more and more ESL brands will come out there, and hopefully more people will get to hear the magic and sort of whet their appetite.
AJ, did you have another question or comment? Your hand's still up.
Yes, I think I heard that the original speaker was active, but now you've reduced it to just these two passive models, correct? The active version is no longer available?
Well, the original active version was what we launched in 2013, and we made a strategic decision to move to a passive unit, and it's not because the speaker wasn't well received or lacked anything in terms of audio quality. It's just so many people have gorgeous amps they want to use. There was just far more demand for a passive speaker, and I think the truth is it was just a little ahead of its time. A passive speaker at a $50,000 price point is a very significant unit, and so we were, we looked at it and made just a corporate decision to pursue the passive units, just because
I wasn't sure if the active one was still available along with the passive, so it's only passive, the two passive models now.
yes, we
Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
I presume some people that certainly the older Martin Logans could be biamp, where you could have solid state for the stat panel and excuse me, tube for the panel and solid state for the woofer cabinet. Can these be biamped?
The PX speakers can be biamp. They do have dual binding posts. The SP1 though, the integration is internal through the crossover, so they aren't biampable. And that was just a decision we made because you're using a very well engineered crossover. Sometimes biamping, I mean, it can give you the advantage of having the two amplifiers working, but if they're carrying the same signal, that's a question of whether or not the amp can drive the speaker. And in the case of either of these speakers, one amplifier is capable of driving either the PX or the SP speaker. But we have on a number of shows actually you run the PX speakers biamped. It's a nice touch.
What do you drive if you have them at home? Just out of curiosity, what are you driving them with?
Well, in all honesty, in the shop we use a couple of different amps. We've got quite a few actually. We've got a Bryston 2B that's perfect for this. We've also got a Moon 340i, which it's a fairly modest 100 watt per channel, but it doubles into 4 ohms. It's a nice solid amplifier. It runs them beautifully. We've done a number of shows with that one. We also have a Hegel 360. We've got a few choices. We've also let's see what else. Well, to be honest, sometimes at home, I'll even just run them off a Yamaha AV receiver. I don't always keep the expensive unit at home because I find that it does a great job just for ordinary things.
Apologies to interrupt, I have to leave, but Murray, thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank
Glad
you.
you joined.
Hopefully I'll see you at the next expo.
Well, Florida's a place we want to be, that's for sure. It's an important place.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Thanks, AJ. More questions or comments from the peanut gallery? Mel, you have a question? You're muted.
I'm off now, hopefully. Can you? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Is there any place close to where we are down here does anybody have them? Any dealers?
Well, that's actually a very good question. We are in discussion with a couple of Florida dealers. We're looking to get something established there. In the meantime, though, if you do have any questions, just feel free to direct them to info@muraudio.com or just go right to the website itself, Muraudio website. We can set you up with a direct sale with through those channels.
Well, I have Martin Logan Montes, but the truth of the matter, for the last couple of years, I've been listening to an old pair of Rogers Studio 1As that I had hooked up, and I haven't taken them out yet. So my Martin Logan's have been sitting behind him covered up. But I was just curious to actually hear them again. I was at the audio show. I don't remember specifically listening to the SP1. So I'd be interested in hearing them at that price point.
Okay. Well, certainly reach out and we can discuss this further with you.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And
How heavy are those SP1s?
Well, they're actually fairly heavy. They're 100 pounds. Now, 75 of that's the speaker and 25 is the solid aluminum stand. We did that to bring the center of gravity down because they're very tall. You don't want them to be, unstable. But yeah, they're about 100 pounds. They're very easy to move around. Actually, you can just sort of, how would you describe it? Just shuffle them on the feet.
Are they powered on? Are the stat panels always power on, or they power down after a while? In other words, would the charge accumulate dust over time?
Well, that's actually an excellent question. They actually have a sleep circuit. So as soon as you use them, they power up within a split second, and then they wait for about 10 minutes before they power back down. So in other words, if you turned off the audio, walked away, within 10 minutes, it goes to sleep. And in terms of dust collection, that's a fantastic question. We discovered years ago that if you set the system up with a negative charge on the panel, it doesn't affect what it sounds like, but it actually repels dust. I have systems that have been used regularly, even 17 years, and there's no issue with dust collection. It's just how you configure the panel itself. These actually repel dust, and they don't, unless you like add dust to them. I wouldn't recommend using a feather duster or anything like that. Anything that can poke through the holes is just generally not a good idea. But
well, I know Martin Logan speakers, they say to vacuum them every now and then. I presume you could do the same with your design. They're accessible from both sides. Wouldn't cause any harm.
Well, you could vacuum them, but you got to be there needs to be a proviso there, because some of the vacuum attachments are like a bristle brush. That's not such a good idea because the bristles can poke through and touch the film. We use a very thin mylar. It's 3.8 micron, and if I'm not mistaken, Martin Logan uses a 12 micron mylar film, so it's about 4 times thicker. So it's not a strength issue. The mylar is incredibly durable, but you still don't want to ever poke it with anything.
What would you anticipate the lifetime of the panels being? Because we know that over time, eventually, they have a finite life.
Yeah, you could say so. I have some panels that are 17 years old. I haven't noticed any change. We have put a lot of effort into the actual panel itself, the choice of coatings, the method of the application of coatings. These actually have, in detail, there's a perimeter contact ring with the actual coating itself, but there's also every single vertical spar also has contact, so that there's basically just multiple connections to the film.
Interesting. More questions or comments, folks?
Yeah, I got one that's just kind of, how do we get that negative charge onto furniture and things about the house to repel dust? I am a bachelor.
I'm not sure if you can do that. If you really want to have your furniture juiced up.
I smell a business idea here.
One thing, I don't know the logistics, I asked about the weight because I think Jansen on their smaller speakers has a demo. You can order a pair and try them in your home and just pay for shipping. And if you want a pair, you then, I guess, get credited, whatnot, to get a new pair. Have you ever considered trying that as a direct sales 30-day audition approach?
There's some things we can certainly do, because we appreciate that if you don't have a dealer to go and hear them, you obviously want to hear them. And so, there are things we can do to help further that along. So like I said, reach out.
There's something actually because the issue, of course, is you can't have a dealer always everywhere, particularly when you start out. So if you don't have a dealer, we have something that's called an exclusive client program, where we will do exactly that, an in-home trial. So you can just reach out to us at info@Muraudio, or if you want directly to me at Roland@Muraudio, or you just go to our webpage. We have a contact form there as well. So that is definitely, where somebody does not have the option and have a dealer, we definitely have a mechanism where we want to make it available a trial basis so you can actually hear them, because that is of course key.
That could be an interesting thing. Maybe if the club can pony up some dollars and we can arrange a demo.
Well, that would be, I mean, I like the word club actually, because the reason I say that is I have this image in my mind of people getting together with a wonderful system, and you're having to share the sweet spot. Because really there's usually one place that's noticeably a little better or a fair bit better. But like I said, the test for me with this kind of technology is, can you sit in front of one of the speakers? What happens? Like, I can actually sit out past one of the speakers, and if you can imagine a sound field where instruments are being played by the people, they're stable, they're still there, they're still beautifully preserved, even if you move. So this kind of speaker would be fantastic for a club, because many people could enjoy the experience.
Just to, to chime in here, you don't have to pony anything up. If you guys actually want to try it out, we'll send you a pair down so the club can experience. There's no cost involved. So that's definitely, I think that's a great idea. And I have to say, by the way, before this ends, we really appreciate that you guys took some time out of your Sunday here to spend it with us. Alan and Bart, thank you for organizing this. But what I want to point out really here is, what impresses me is the quality of the questions. I appreciate that you guys all brought your A game today. Very engaging. I mean, these are the best questions that I've heard in a long time. Very good. Really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate you guys, giving a presentation. It's a very unique design. I heard it very briefly at the Florida Audio Expo, but I'm looking forward to hearing it again in depth. But we'll follow up with you. Perhaps we can arrange a demo for the whole club once we get past this pandemic situation.
And I'll definitely
Yeah.
come down and visit you, Alan, if you get a pair of these somewhere down there.
Seriously, guys, just reach out. We'd love to get you a pair down there to do some in-depth listening, because that's really what it takes to familiarize with the concept. Because you have to hear them to really understand what's happening here. And it's actually great that you give us some time to talk about it, because even in this time frame, I mean, we could be talking for hours. There's so many aspects to it. So even compressing it down to a couple hours is tight. But being able to hear them, that's when a lot of the questions go away, and it kind of presents itself as what it is.
How many people in the country have them, do you think?
Pardon?
How many people have them?
At this point?
Yeah.
That's a good question. We'd actually have to tabulate it. It's
I always wondered if you could have a network of proud owners that you could direct somebody to, and whether you have to pay them for their demo or not. That would be one way to go listen to them without moving heaven and earth.
Oh.
See, you bring up some good points there, because like you said, the issue is always when you bring out something new, and particularly at the price point that we're talking about in the ultra high end, those are very good ideas. And in the future, that's something that we might want to implement.
You've got to create the Muraudio listening network.
That's right.
No, I think this would be a unique opportunity for you gentlemen, because I sense sort of a background flavor here. A lot of people have exposure to the sound of ESLs, love the sound of ESLs, are familiar. These have a sound signature that is very unique. It is, it takes all of the clarity and so on of ESL, but it introduces a different type of imaging. In other words, if we play a track, which is a live recording, like thinking of one in particular, High Life. It's just somebody has a small hand castanet or a tambourine. It's a physically small instrument. This particular speaker system will reproduce the smallest detailed percussion instrument at exact scale and size. It's actually a little haunting. A sax actually has the size and character of a sax. And so if you bring into the ESL experience, the more typical, we'll call it accurate sound staging, And I'm not suggesting that people don't like the sound of a line source ESL. Of course, many do, but it is different. You can't, if you think about it, the most natural thing to me as a benchmark is someone's talking to me. You're in front of me. Your mouth's this big. I can't reproduce you through a 4-foot source. It will sound like you. It will sound maybe very, very much like you, but it won't have that same character as the person in front of you, because that requires a point source. Most instruments are point source in their origin. So to reproduce the soundstage, in my opinion, you do have to have a point source type system. But one of the unique attributes of the speaker is that you're not actually tied to a 1-inch tweeter when you listen to these. When I say tied to it, what I mean by that is your perception of the tweeter isn't what governs the, we'll call it the disappearing factor. Okay, this speaker doesn't behave like that. So when you move in front of one of them, you basically don't have that sudden perception that one is getting completely loud and the soundstage is fading. Best way to understand that is to hear it. We'll have to help you out with that.
Yeah, actually, what that whole less of a line source, more of a point source is a particular interest for those of us who are into multi-channel audio.
Yes.
And obviously now with immersive audio with Atmos. So one of the things I found out when I implemented Atmos with my 6-foot tall Martin Logans was the 3D bubble is not quite as pinpoint accurate as it was with point source speaker systems.
Yes.
That 4-foot line source really sort of has too much energy at different points in height. So my question to you would be, would your type of technology and imaging be more appropriate for recreating a 3D audio sound space?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, as an example, I have a set of these that I use in home theater, and I've purchased over the years 3 different center channels because the industry wants you to have a center channel. This is a great thing, and I've almost every single time I end up doing the exact same thing. I put it back onto the setting where you have the phantom and you split the center to the mains.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's nothing that can reproduce voice or music or what you're seeing as well as an ESL. The center channel, and plus you want the voice coming out of where the person is.
Yeah, that's why I have a 6-foot tall ESL center I built myself. So
Wow. Else? How did you get in the center though without seeing it?
it's behind my acoustically transparent screen.
There you go.
And it's got a line source of woofers, and it's a cut up SL3 for the panel. So
that's actually a very, very inventive solution.
But yeah, but it's what's required. So to your point, right? You need something that is mirror matched. So this is why it goes to some of my previous questions about monopole versions of the SP1, because I could envision 7 of those making a very good imaging with all of the good qualities of the ESL.
Oh no, that was absolutely mind-blowing.
So if you ever want to explore that further,
like
I might be in that kind of guy, that kind of customer.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you have a very interesting setup.
You should go to the Martin Logan Owners Forum and seek out Jonathan's the system description, and he's got the whole step-by-step build of his system, and the center channel is quite unique. He's like, I guess, an informal advisor to Martin Logan. I think they've taken him up on some of his suggestions in the past.
Okay. No, but I do understand what you mean by the line source having a different characteristic. If you compare it to a point source, you won't get quite the same precision and placement. And that's normal because a line source simply can't resolve a small vertical dimension. It's not capable.
Yeah. So yeah, so that's why I think you're on to the great combination of ESL with a different type of imaging, either from the Omni speakers or from your SP1. I guess is a very interesting thing, and I think with further development in terms of how it would work in integrating with 3D audio systems, very high-end 3D audio, it could be very interesting. And of course, home theaters also a big space these days too.
Well,
Jonathan, where are you at?
I'm based in Atlanta.
Atlanta. We can't go there, can we?
Yeah, oh, Alan's been here. He's seen earlier iterations of the system.
Well worth the journey.
Only what, 7.5 hours? Of course we can go there.
Yeah. But
Well, as a club meeting, I mean,
We just charter a bus.
I'm in.
yeah.
Any
So Murray,
further
I need to
questions?
drop off, but I just wanted to say, I really appreciate your presentation. You have wonderful technology. When you first came out with your active system, I was just blown away. And I wish you all the best, and hopefully one of these days get to hear more of them in person.
Well, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for
Take
joining.
care, Jonathan.
All right, see you guys.
Well, I don't know if there are any further questions at this point, but you know, we can certainly address them if you wish.
That looks like that might be it for now, but we'll definitely follow up with you on your gracious offer. Maybe we'll be able to work something out and get an in-person demo here for everybody.
That we can 100% organize that. That's actually a fantastic idea. And you know, part of our plan in the future was, quite frankly, to do a bit more outreach with audio clubs. I mean, COVID has obviously turned everything a bit upside down, but when you guys are ready, we'd love to set something up. And as I said, don't worry about anything. We'll send them down, and we really would look forward to your feedback and you know, how what you guys' perception is.
Well, thank you.
Fantastic. Bart, I'll let you wrap up.
Okay.
And everybody, the Suncoast Club members, if you can stay on, we'll talk about our future planning for moving back to in-person meetings and whatnot to follow this.
Okay, well, Murray and Roland, thank you again. It was a great presentation. We appreciate your time, and it was just a lot of fun, a few laughs, and just a lovely, lovely thing. So look forward to seeing you guys again soon. And as Alan said, we'll see what we can do about organizing something where we can do a demo before February.
Absolutely.
That'd be wonderful.
And it was, I got to say, it was truly engaging. Thank you very much, everybody. And thanks, guys, for organizing this.
Yeah, the questions have been fantastic.
Truly.
Thank you so much. Fascinating.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
Take care, guys.